Greetings and salutations. Ben here. Welcome to the Sunday night hang right here, hanging on Sundays on YouTube. Please subscribe if you're new, and welcome back if you're returning. Speaking of returning, we're due to catch up because the man's been out on the road, guitar in hand, just slinging six strings and melting faces and just having a grand old time with it. Welcome back, my good friend Simon Hosford, one of my favorite shredders in the whole wide world because he has taste, folks. He has taste.
You're far too kind. Thanks, Ben, for having me on. Hey, everyone in the chat. Absolute pleasure, as always.
Yes. Every time I see you play, all of a sudden I'll go, well, you know what? Let's deep dive. And then I go into some of your pure shred vids. I'm like, he does know all the notes. But then most of the time, you know when and where to use them. It's like, I don't need to use them all right now. I'm going to keep a few in reserve. Yeah. But
I think look, you can't give away your bag of tricks all in one hit. You've got to leak them out slowly. Plus, of course, if you give away your full bag of tricks in one hit, then everyone knows every trick you've got in the bag and there's nothing else to do. So my bag of tricks is definitely not extensive, so I like to just leak out one at a time. It gives me time to come up with some new tricks as well.
I hear you. Well, let's see. We already got 36 people rolling in and more coming in all the time. Let's give some shout-outs. We have Randy Crooks, Brad Guitar Miller with a new Fender-style guitar in hand. He just came off a guitar building course out at Texas Toast Guitars.
Right.
And we've got Hit Metalworks, Ryan Hull, Octopus Ears, Jeff K. Let's see who else. Ferd Burfel, Charles 75N, Dan of New Jersey, Mohogany, Jason Lindholm, Matt Stewart, Braxel, Michael Kraus, Fruitcake Tony, Gretch Zeppelin. Wow, all the gangs here. Symmetry, Joe Hervey 84. He's got one eye. Well, he's got the ears on us and the eye on the Yankees game because apparently baseball. I don't know. American pastime. I don't get it. But sure. Terry's 3Gs. John, ZD351. Good to see you. Thomas Santiago. Made it. Awesome. LRM Guitars. Who else do we have in here? Paul McNary. Early Birds. Absolute Mayhem's in here. Nice. Unfucking believable. He says, we're no longer the Chatosphere. We are troublemakers. Yep. Yep, and he's got a wrench, so I don't know what that says. John Landino. Nice. He says, I just opened a cold one and rolled a fatty. Let's get this party started. Perfect. Multitasking. I like it.
Yeah.
Guitar Man 45's here. Martin Lemaire. Nice. Zach Thong. Nice. JP Page 2. Paul Leonard Ewing. Cushman. Go on down the bottom here. Probably more people rolling in. Michael B. Bozique. Awesome. Johnny Heartbreaker.
Yeah, man, it's a quality crowd in here, that's for sure.
Yeah, many rolling in. We're already up to 43. Yeah. Security's patting them down. I don't know why. I think they're making sure the pockets aren't empty. They're like, no, here, you need a flask in here. You look like that type. So
yeah. Making sure that people have enough different things in their pockets.
Exactly. Yeah. If you remember the night, you didn't do it right. I don't know.
That's what I used to say. And I had a friend of mine that used to say everything in moderation, including moderation.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I moderate moderately.
Moderately. And I've got a separate friend who's one of his favorite things to say, if it's worth doing at all, it's worth overdoing. And I think that they're good maxims to live by, Yep.
So I'll try anything once, twice if it tastes good.
Yeah.
Hey, Keith Campbell.
Keith Campbell, the man. Yo. Hey, buddy.
He was in the chat yesterday. I saw he had posted in the chat shortly after I created the show. He's like, yes. He was like, all right, Keith.
Keith, I hope you haven't been sitting and waiting for the whole time, brother.
Yeah.
Hit Metalworks, yes. Cheers from Vancouver. And cheers from Melbourne, Australia. It's a little bit early for the fine wines and the beers down here, but it's never too early for a little Baileys in a cup,
That That's right. Nothing wrong with that. That's my airline drink, like while flying, because
That's a
they give
good
you
one.
free coffee on the airlines. But if you take
Yeah.
enough bottles of Bailey's, the little ones, you can carry 8 of them in your pockets, and they don't say anything because
That's
they're
right.
under the size.
Under the size, and it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Stevie Douglas?
Johnny Heartbreaker was asking, how's things down under? I was just chatting with Ben in the green room saying wet. Things have been very wet down here. There's been a lot of flooding in different parts of the country, and some down here too in Melbourne where I am. But that's what are you going to do? It's we're almost through where are we now? We're halfway through spring, and it really doesn't feel like spring this year. This has been just wet and cold pretty much the whole
It
time.
lingers, yeah. Although there are less chance of forest fires this year, you would think.
Well, there's definitely less chance of that. So even when we hit summer, if it ends up going suddenly hot, everything's just going to be too wet, hopefully, for there to be crazy fires. But you never know.
What's up, Grasshopper? Oh, Mayhem. Thank you very much with the super chat. And just so you know, folks, all super chats this month are going towards the niece's Christmas gifts this year.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. He says, Ben, Simon, gardening is done. Awesome. Harvest was great. Good to hear that. Early sample are strong enough to super chat $42. Awesome.
What a guy.
I hope to be checking out some of those samples soon.
But of course.
Yes. A resident horticulturalist.
Yeah.
Yep. Can't say that word later in the stream. Oh.
That's awesome.
BC Rich 581, good to see you, brother. He says Ben is getting his niece Sam a gas grill. Yeah, I'm sure my sister would love that. Stop trying to use that inside.
Yeah.
Intellect.
Exactly.
Up, Gary?
Well, I hope everyone, wherever they're tuning in from, has been, having a good time and everything's going all right.
We're briefly back into summer weather today. You go outside in a t-shirt, which was nice for mid-October. Because last week we're getting down to 3 degrees at night, high of 9 during the day, and you're just like, what happened to summer? Summer was a week ago.
Yeah, yeah. You're talking Celsius too, aren't you, Ben? You guys
I am.
Yeah, that's right. There's many things that the Canadians and the Australians do exactly right, and the way we deal in Celsius. And do you deal in kilometers or miles?
Kilometers.
Oh, kilometers. Yeah. Cool.
Unless it's a muscle car, then you're talking miles. Depends.
Although
height and weight, we always do imperial for some reason. Like if someone says, like, I'm 1.84 meters, I'm like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, we sort of do that too. I mean, if someone says, what's your height? We would still say 6 foot before we would say I'm 183 centimeters or something. It's just
exactly.
Some things are just a clunky, and other things, of course, we still measure in inches down here as well.
Especially when setting up American guitars.
Exactly.
And thank you, Charles. He says, load them up. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Dr. Fabric Top.
But 9 during the middle of the day is definitely still pretty chilly.
Yeah. Bozy says, Ben, I was in Montreal with a bunch of old college buddies. Great city, good food, and the adult entertainment was outstanding too. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's
and Mo says we drive on opposite sides of the road. So you guys drive on the right-hand side, yeah?
We do. We do that just mostly for the American tourists. It cuts down on fatalities by 1,000%. I'm just saying.
Of course. No, that's very gracious of you guys to cop that. Take one for the team,
Yeah.
But that's right. It would. I can't imagine that would be good with Americans driving over the border and then having to swap sides.
What throws them off is that we all speed though. Like,
oh, okay.
Because down there, they'll do a few miles an hour over the speed limit, but the cops are much more like on our highway. Everybody does 20 to 25 kilometers over the speed limit. It's just
really
the flow of traffic. Yep.
Yeah,
and the cops don't care because it's less gridlocks because everyone's moving faster. And thank you, Randy, for the super chat. Merry Christmas, girls. Maybe a 3/4 size guitars. Yep. Yeah, someone wants electric. I got her a 3/4 size acoustic a couple of years ago, and now she wants an electric. She likes the Wolfgang shaped guitars.
Yeah, right. Someone was asking, I can't remember who it was. Is America the only place that does miles? I believe the UK actually deals in miles.
Weird.
Yeah, weird, right?
I think they invented the metric system or something. I figure as Commonwealth nations, it was forced upon us.
Well, that's exactly right. Both Australia and Canada are Commonwealth nations, and yet the Brits are still in miles. So,
yeah. Well, and they also weigh stuff in stone, whatever the hell that is.
Yeah, that's from the Middle Ages. That weigh measurement, I think.
Yeah.
But,
hey, Eddie Van Haskell.
Yeah, Michael Krause is saying, as a US person who's driven all over Europe, the only thing that messes me up is the occasional turn. Yeah, I remember when I was living in LA for a while, and the first thing I did there, a friend said, hey, drive my car around, because it's impossible, as everyone knows, to really not have a car in LA if you're going from Hollywood to Santa Monica and different places. But yeah, I adapted quicker than I thought, but geez, you got to be vigilant, because for what there is like a left-hand turn, which is, I guess, that's always the hard one, because you're going against the most traffic. But for here, that's a right-hand turn. And I remember one day, thankfully it was down like a suburban side street. My brain had just slipped, and I was driving down the wrong side of the road, and I've got this car coming straight at me, flashing high beams. And I'm like, look at this idiot driving down the wrong side, even in America. And until I got right up to them, and I went, oh shit, it's me. But you do have to be vigilant. But it's amazing how quickly the brain recalibrates that stuff. You'd think it would be a nightmare, but it's actually, 2 or 3 days of driving, and you sort of get used to it.
Everything, and driving in the opposite side of the car too helps.
Yeah, I think it helps, because then it's an exact flip of the brain. I think if you were driving on the same side of the car, it would definitely be trickier. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And yes, Charles and John. Yes. And who else? Oh, my niece hurts in here. Awesome. Good to see you. Hey, unbelievable. Thank you. Super chat as well. Lots of questions for Haas. Touring board versus television. Is Tommy a perfectionist? Tour stories you have never told. Inappropriateness encouraged. Stories about Proudfoot. Haas shreds. Wow, that is a lot of questions.
That's a lot of questions. That's fine. I'm happy to talk about all of those. I'll leave the touring stories to last, but yes, I can tell a couple that I don't generally tell, because they're usually embarrassing for me or something. Okay, what was the first? Touring board versus television. Touring board for me is pretty simple. Essentially, I've just got it really sort of has to be a one size fits all for me. It can't be too specific, because I get called to play with different artists. Most of them would fall under the loose umbrella of pop or rock or blues. So really, like, over the years, I've just, whittled it down to the things that will kind of cover everything. But so I've got like three sort of gain stages, because what I'll generally do, and especially if I'm traveling, we get backline amps, which is, I'm sure, the same for everyone. And I like to, usually I'll just use a Fender combo of some kind, whatever turns up. And I've learned to not be too picky with that, because when you've got an exact type of amp that you really, really have dialed in your pedal board to, then when the backline company can't supply it and they've got some other thing, it kind of throws all your settings out. Right. So, I mean, the old Fender Blues Deluxe or the DeVille, like either of those, I mean, which essentially are the same, but different wattages and different speakers, that pretty much have them all over the world. So I've kind of set up my pedal board to work really well with one of them. But, if a twin turns up or something else, or a deluxe reverb, it kind of works the same. I've given up. I used to always hire Marshall heads. And even when I'm doing rock stuff now, I'll still hire Fender combos, because I found that Marshall heads are wildly inconsistent as backline. It's because they haven't been looked after. They're not biased properly. You know, I mean, the valves, the tubes might be old, and they get banged around so much that if they haven't come from a good backline company, I mean, I've used Marshall heads that where the bass control didn't do anything. There was no bottom end. It just sounded like a fly buzzing around on the dashboard, you know?
Right.
So after years of getting crap Marshall heads in different places, I found that Fender combos, and especially the deluxes and the DeVilles, are the most consistent. They're not identical, but they're they're in the ballpark.
Sure.
So essentially, I'll use like 3 different gain stages, and I'll talk about them in a minute. And then I've got like a chorus pedal and a delay, and then a Strymon El Capistan doing like a really, really tight slap and a little bit of spring reverb. What else? Actually, that's kind of it. I find that I can really cover most things with that.
And I'm curious. I was going to say, with the pop gigs, I would almost think there's like 2 methods on that, because you're going to have the pop artist that's like, I want that rock guitar sound in the mix. And so essentially it's the same as a rock gig, but you're just playing pop music. And then you get the, I want that Landau spacey cleans, and which is a totally different sound.
That's right. Yeah. So what I found is, so I've got 3 different gain stages, like I was mentioning. And the first one is just a Wampler bell, which, as everyone knows, is kind of like the Nobles. What is it? The OD1. I forget its model name, but the Nobles green one that a lot of the Nashville guys used to use. I find that that's good. So I run the amp super clean, no breakup at all. The reason for that mainly is so that when I hit my solo pedal, the big gainy one, it doesn't mush out. It still stays kind of like pretty tight. And then it's really all about the pedal and not about driving the amp too much. So I use the Wampler bell to get that breaking up clean sound. So it's set pretty clean. It means that if I'm picking single notes quietly, it'll sound clean. If I pick single notes hard, then it will start to break up. And if I go to and that's say be on the neck pickup, then if I go to the bridge pickup, then I can even get like a almost Malcolm Youngy kind of like a distorted, but not much, you know, but I would call it barky, you know, kind of like that bridge pickup bark with some breakup. And then for my rhythm sound, now obviously if I'm playing with different artists, I might adjust the settings on the pedals, but the pedals have tended to stay. Rhythm sound, I run the bell into Vemuram shanks. And the combination of those two just sounds so good together. If anyone's got those 2 pedals and have never tried cascading them, give it a go. Run the bell really light and then run the shanks with gain on like midday. So not heaps of gain, but when you cascade them, they sound super cool. Great rhythm sound. And it will get you from that Malcolm Young place all the way to, I mean, it would almost get you all the way to like an Eddie rhythm sound or anything that was like a reasonably high gain rhythm sound for pop rock, you know? And then my favorite, which has been on my board ever since I got it, is the LPD 87. That's my solo sound.
Right.
And that thing is awesome. I did a massive shootout maybe like 9 months ago or something, where, you know, when you have a spare day or 2 and you just sort of get that bug. And I thought, okay, I've got so many pedals in my garage in boxes, that the same ones, because I tend to not really sell anything. So all the way back to my old Boss Turbo Overdrive, that yellow one, which is, it's a pretty interesting sounding pedal when you go back to it after all these years. But
do I have that?
Do you have one of those? Anyone in the chat got a Boss Turbo Overdrive? Jeez, those things are ancient.
I got a Turbo Distortion. Yeah, I got a Turbo Overdrive.
Woohoo! There you go. So I used that when I was a teenager. I used that when I was like 16, 17 stuff. And, you know, it's funny because, and I'll get back to the rest of the board in a second, but obviously, like when I was a teenager, I was just using pedals and and some combos and stuff. But then once I started doing like proper gigs, that was right at the era of all the rack stuff. So
Right.
I ended up using I used different things, but where it ended up sort of stopping was like a Marshall JMP1 with the Marshall 9200 power amp.
Sure.
But I was sort of doing bigger rock gigs then, like I was touring with Men at Work, and I was doing the Fusion thing with Virgil Donati, and a couple of things like that. So it kind of worked good. And then I had a little half rack Boss SE50 multi effects.
Nice.
And the funny thing is, I was on eBay the other day, and I thought, I can't remember whether I sold it or put it in the bin because it stopped working. But a lot of the forums have been saying that going back to it, they had this like really, really great sound, which I never really appreciated at the time. The only reason I had it is because that was the one I could afford,
Sure.
But that was kind of my rack in like 90, 93, 94, something like that. And then I ended up just sort of like I sort of thought that the pedals thing for me was over. And I guess everyone did. I mean, a lot of touring guitarists were doing the rack thing. And it's really interesting now how it's come full circle. And not only is almost no one touring with racks, and it's all about these, these glorious pedal boards that everyone can have now, but there's just so many amazing pedal makers and boutique companies making great stuff. But what I'm thankful for, getting back to the story, is that until I was doing a big spring clean and cleaning out the garage, I'd forgotten that I had boxes of all my original pedals, and some of which have made it sort of back to some of my boards, because I thought, oh man, I haven't heard this in 30 years. I wonder what it sounds like to my ears now. And you plug it in, and it surprisingly, you go, man, that's great, because it's a 1980s pedal, which is what everyone is trying to get on eBay and Reverb now, the one before they started using different chips and different caps and different this and that. But I digress massively. So back to the thing. I can't remember why I even brought up Turbo Overdrive now, but it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Tangents.
I know. Tangents. That Bailey's is kicking in nicely. Sorry, everybody. Right. I do remember why now. It's because we were talking about the LPD 87 pedal, and what I did was, when I found these boxes of all my old distortion pedals, I've got one of the big box Rats. I've actually got a bunch of different Rats. I used to use them a lot. I used to love those pedals. And what I didn't realize at the time that I think I loved about them was that they're distortion, but depending on how you set it, it almost starts like to 20% going into fuzz.
Yep.
And I really like that slight fuzziness about them. I think for soaring lead sounds, they just cut through a mix. Really,
and there's the whole group of guys that use them the way like guys use tube screamers, where they're turning up the level and down the distortion all the way.
Yeah. And that works great that works great with the Rat too, because if you're using the gain crazy high, they can get a bit too kind of fizzy or something, So anyway, what I did, I had the whole day off, and I put the phone on silent, and I've got all my boxes of pedals, and I thought, and I hadn't had the LPD 87 long, and I used to have one, what was it called? Made by Rockbox, that I used to really like a lot. And I can't remember the name of it now. It used to have a swirly hand-painted color on it.
Speaking of whom, there's Mr. Pedals himself.
Hey, Lawrence, how you doing? Your ears must have been burning, fella, because we were just going through my touring pedal board, and I was telling everyone that your 87 is like my solo sound, and has been ever since I got it, pretty much. But I was just about to say, your timing is perfect, because I'd like you to hear this. I spent a whole day in the studio. I had my amp mic'd up out the back because I didn't want to get ear fatigue. I wanted perspective. I also wanted to be able to record it and come back to it the next morning and flip through the tracks and A-B with the same riff,
right,
or the same lick, And I went through every single distortion pedal that I've never got rid of, all the way back to the turbo overdrive. And the one I had before that was by a company called Rock Tech, this sort of plastic looking Aryan kind of looking thing, you know. I don't know if anyone remembers Rock Tech, but they made like really affordable, would be the way to put it, pedals. That was my first ever distortion pedal, was a Rock. Oh, dude, that's unreal. So I don't know whether they sold Rock Tech in the States, but obviously they did in Canada, yeah?
Yeah.
And they did here in Australia too, like my local music store when I was 13 years old. They pretty much didn't have even all the cool Boss ones that I wanted, but they had this whole display of every Rock Tech pedal, and they were cheap, you know.
Yeah.
So that was my first one. I think I bought that when I was like 13 or something. But man, did that used to howl and feedback and do all sorts of things. Anyway, so I did this shootout, and you know, over the years, I've got some great pedals. Like I said, I've got the Rats and the Maxon Super Distortion, which I really like, that Landau uses.
Sure.
I wish I could remember the name of that Rockbox one, because that was my favorite solo sound for
the Red Rocks somebody mentioned.
Hang on a minute. I might even have it handy, and I'll show you, and someone can tell me, because I don't think it's written on it.
So Josh, Surf B, others rolling in.
Give me a second. I'm going to raid there.
Yeah. We will get to the other part of your question.
I'll definitely get to the other part of the question.
Snuck in here. Mad Raj.
Where is this little guy? Here it is. That's right. It's called the Boiling Point by Rockbox. It's pretty much green these days, but it used to be a hand-painted swirl, so everyone was different. So originally when I bought it, that's what I liked about it. I liked that everyone was hand-painted and different, but it sounded good, and it sounded better than my Rats to me at the time. It had the Rats do a thing where some of the bottom end kind of comes out a little bit, and I didn't want that for a lead sound. I don't want to lose any low end, because of course you're playing single notes most of the time. Great for rhythm sounds, but you want lead notes to be fat, you know. But you know, I've got the Keeley modded Super Overdrive and the Angry Charlie. I mean, as you'd imagine, there's probably 20 at least different distortion pedals that I've kept, and so I went through all of them and I put them through a switcher so I could do instant ABs, and I had my touring rig mic'd out at the back, like I said, so I knew how it would sound into the backline kind of amps that I would get. And the LPD 87 ended up king, top of the mountain at the end of that day, and ever since then it's just stayed on the board, and it's been glorious.
Nice.
So that's it. So the bell is like the, you know, clean breakup, then that runs into the Vemuram for a rhythm sound, and then the LPD for the solo sound. And then the delay pedal at the end kind of changes. I recently got the Halo, which of course everyone's been talking about. Is a really,
I got one too. They're great.
Yeah, it's killer. It's not on the board at the moment just because I really want to sit. I haven't had a day yet in between touring to really sit and do like what I just did with the distortions. I want to mic up the amp out the back and like really tweak the sound so I know they'll be great. So I've got a TC Electronic. I think it's Flashback, the blue one. So that's doing like I don't even change the delay time that much, to be honest. I kind of leave it on about 300 milliseconds with like 2 repeats on the analog tape thing. So it kind of rolls off all that. I kind of roll the top end out so you don't get a repeat of the pick attack. And the only other thing I do, which works good for sort of more pop country stuff, but actually I just leave it on because it works good with the rock stuff too, is I've got a Strymon El Capistan that I have set with like a really fast slap. So like, like that kind of fast, but not at equal volume. Obviously the slap is pretty quiet, and it's probably in the vicinity of, I don't know, 80 to 100 milliseconds or something. And a tiny bit of spring reverb in there as well. So that I just leave, that's my leave on all the time pedal.
Sure.
And it just gives you a bit of that studio thing. Like, I mean, one of the things that Chris Lord-Alge does when he's mixing rock records and country records all the time is he's got a slap delay and a bit of a sort of a short 1 second room reverb always ready to go that he just sends on his electric guitars. And when I was watching one of his tutorials one day, I just thought, well, why wouldn't I do that live then? Because I can't trust the front of house guy to be on that stuff.
Right.
So I found that the El Capistan did a great job of that because it gives you a quiet slap and a tiny, tiny bit of spring reverb, just so that even if I'm using none of the pedals, it's not bone dry. There's like
just give it a little room, a little space.
A little room, a little space, exactly. Yeah. So
now you skipped over, what's the chorus pedal on the board?
That's the Arian stereo chorus that Landau used for decades. And I can use it slow if I need to, if it's like a sort of a big ballad kind of thing. But actually, its greatest sound to me is the way Michael Landau sets it, which is like a pretty fast rate. So it almost sounds more like a Leslie, actually.
Right. Okay.
And then the only other thing that I forgot to mention, which is an always-on pedal too, is I've got the Carl Martin Honeycomb, which for anyone that uses compressor pedals on their board, that's one of the best ones that I've found. That's super easy to use, and it's got a dry wet blend, which means that, like, depending on the gig or what the room sounds like on stage, like sometimes you don't need it at all because you want if you're in a really reverby auditorium, I want to hear my transient and pick attack way more than the note. So I'll actually just blend it full 100% dry. But usually I leave it on about 10 to 11 o'clock. So about half and half kind of thing.
Nice.
And that's really good. So although I have to say I'm curious to check out the Paul Reed Smith one. I forget what he calls it, but it's essentially an LA2A in a pedal.
Yeah, I saw the Tim Pierce video on that, and it sounded really nice.
Yeah, he used it mostly as a boost, I think, more than as a compressor. But then, Mick and Dan had Paul Reed Smith on their show the other day, and they were using it way more like with a lot of compression, but it still sounded pretty transparent. It was good. But so there's always something to check out. But that's essentially it. So that's a very long way of saying that's my touring.
Good. So the next part is Tommy a perfectionist?
Yes and no. And I'll explain that. It's not that he's a perfectionist. He has a very high standard for himself. I would say it's less that he's not one of those guys that's always in his own head, like cerebral and always like practicing. But what he is doing is he's always playing, always. I don't think I've ever worked with anyone so much, anyone that spends all their time, even their downtime, with a guitar in their hand. Like or it doesn't even matter what instrument, because I've toured with, like Virgil plays a lot. Like if he's on the tour bus or something, he'll always be doing something on the drum pad. But Tommy, I'll give you an example of what Tommy's like. That'll probably explain his level of musicianship. Well, one thing is, and I can't remember exactly how old he is now, but I mean, I would have to guess it would be late 60s. I mean, ever since he was young, he's just never, ever stopped playing, and not one day does he not have a guitar in his hand. Well, I mean, I can tell you, for me, there are plenty of days when I don't even touch the guitar, but Tommy is just like, he lives it and breathes it, and the guitar for him is really like it's like a third arm. Like he doesn't look at it as something he does for a living at all. It's just in his blood. So when I was touring around Europe with him for a few months, we had a pretty hectic schedule, and we had a touring coach. So it was one of those things where we're sleeping on the bus, and then we'd get to the venue, and then, we could shower and change and eat and do all that stuff at the venue. But generally speaking, after we were done with the gig, after the pack down, we were back on the bus to do an overnight drive somewhere. So a schedule of a day or two with Tommy would be like this. So you'd wake up in the bus. He's an early riser, and he's always full of energy, and he's always sprightly. Like I wish I had the energy he has now at my age,
Right.
because it's really something to behold. So he'd be on the bus up at 6:30 or something like that, already with the acoustic guitar in his hand, just noodling, trying out new ideas, or maybe trying to finish writing a particular song that he's working on. And he would have the guitar in his hand most of the time until we'd arrive at whichever city we were getting to for sound check. And then we would do the sound check, which of course could take up to 2 hours or so of mucking around. And then once the sound is set, Tommy likes to just jam for a little bit with everyone on stage. So we jam for another 20, 30 minutes once the sound was set and once we played our sound checking songs. Then after that, he would go and do a meet and greet. So straight after sound check, he'd meet with up to 20 to 30, 40 people, whoever had sort of either arranged it or bought special tickets for it or won a competition. Then after that, he would sit with a special 3 or 4 that he'd picked out, all of them with acoustic guitars. And for another hour and a half or two, he would sit and do like a workshop, like just backstage or something, or in like a private room at the venue. Then he'd have a break to have dinner. We'd do the show, pack down, get back on the bus, and straight away on the bus, his acoustic guitar is back in his hand, and probably till about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, he would be playing at the front of the bus. And then 5 hours sleep, get up, coffee on, playing the guitar again. And that's every single day for 3 months. So the thing is, I wouldn't so much say he's a perfectionist, because that level of ability doesn't really come from that. It just comes from never
That's
ever.
almost like just pure enthusiast in so many levels, like
and
fully embracing
it. And it's a beautiful thing to be around. In fact, it taught me a lot all the years that I toured with him, because to have such passion for something that, I mean, even for me, sometimes once I've done 3 or 4 hours straight practice, I'm done for a while. I need a break. I need to go do something else. But for him, having a break is he's like, why would I do that? So yeah. So that's so I'd say not. I mean, Tommy's not a perfectionist, also because he can laugh at his mistakes. And as brilliant as he is, and as much as he can play anything, I mean, he can chop heads on electric guitar better than most like dedicated electric guitarists, and I've seen it multiple times. So the fact that he spends most of his time like playing fingerstyle on acoustic, if you've ever seen him play Telecaster with a tube screamer cranked up and just cutting heads playing blues, man, that is something to see as well.
I can imagine.
Oh, it's scary. In fact, at the end of our shows, because I would pretty much play electric most of the night, and then some songs I'd double him on acoustic and we do a duet or something. But then towards the end of the gig, we'd start getting louder and start really rocking out some fast blues and Stevie Ray Vaughan type stuff. And he'd pull out his Telecaster and we'd do these big open trading fours things. I used to hate that. I used to hate it with a passion, because even though I felt pretty good about my playing and ever since.
And you're there to accompany him, but still.
I'm there to accompany him. And
yeah. But still, for to pull off, if he's pulling a 10, you still got to come in with like a 9.3 at least, right? Otherwise, it's like, wow, this is kind of a one-sided guitar off thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would be pulling out my best and what I considered my most scariest licks, like just to even keep up with him. And electric guitar and fast blues playing and stuff isn't even really what he spends his time doing. And yet, he's got this endless. We're talking about a box of tricks earlier. Tommy's is endless, and I really, truly mean endless. I've been on stage with him where he's soloing for 10 minutes, like every night towards the end of the show. And on a 3-month tour, I would say most of those solos had completely different licks. Like he never repeated himself. And I mean, I can't do that. I mean, I've got a box of tricks that I'll draw from. And if I'm cutting heads with someone, I might not play the lick exactly, but it's going to be kind of like lick number 23,
Yeah.
Whereas he doesn't have that. He's he's got a memory where he just never forgets anything. So he can pull out a lick. I mean, I've seen him come off stage and say, wow, I haven't played that lick since I was 18. Stuff like that.
Yeah, you're like, what?
Yeah. And I'm just like, oh man, I can't even remember the licks I worked on last week in the heat of the moment. You know, when you're in the heat of battle, you always forget it. It's like studying for a test at school. Yeah. It's just gone. But and I think there was some other question in there too, right?
Yeah. Then there was about the touring stories and Proudfoot.
I haven't seen Glenn for a while, but man, he is a monster player. If anyone doesn't know who we're talking about, Google Glenn Proudfoot. He's such a wonderful, wonderful player, incredible technique, and he's a great guy too. But we don't cross paths like that much.
Sure. But, we'll hold off on the inappropriate touring stories for later. Want to welcome in two Christophers and a Kurt 5150, chief bottle washer over at the End of the Bus Network, Wednesdays and Saturdays. They invade our lives twice a week with hilarity and a lack of professionalism that I strongly encourage in the YouTube world.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
And I rock Dead Blues and Gear Junkie 35. Nice. All the cool
Hey, Ben Tom. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, brother Tom. Got a new piece of rack gear with a bent ear on it. That sucks. That sucks.
Yeah, that definitely sucks. Well, one of my most nerve-wracking moments always is if I buy a piece of rack gear from Reverb or eBay, because invariably it just, and it's not even so much that I've had bad luck with that it turns up damaged in transit, because that's obviously not the seller's fault then, but I've had a lot of times where it turns up way worse than the pictures. And you can tell that it wasn't damaged in the box. It was because those rack gears had been bent and the picture of the gear was taken before they were bent or something, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, you get that.
I can't get a good photo. They'll just find a stock photo on the internet. You're like,
oh, of course. Yeah. Put a stock photo, put a sepia filter on it and it looks all, yeah. That's right.
That's right. Yeah. Tom's going to miss EVH Con coming up because he's going to be in Nashville that weekend. And he's going to go over to Glazers to get some work done on his Strat. Which I was watching a brief little shop tour of Glazers, and so I took a photo of the closet where all the to-do list is, and I said, you know, we had heard about 14 months turnaround time, and I believe it because I just saw they are so backed up right now on stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, that EVH Con's going to be interesting for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really interesting.
Yes, Michael B. It's in Greenwich, Connecticut, at Joe Suma's place at Greenwich Music. Dave Nesdahl used to go to that one.
Hey, John ZD351 in chat. Hey, John, I haven't seen you online for a while. Haven't seen you in person for a while either. John came to the Corner Hotel gig that we did in May, and he's saying that I remember Simon being upset when he met me for the first time, and I turned up looking way worse than the pictures. It's brilliant. That's all right, brother. So did I. So it's good. We're equal. Hope you're doing well, fella. Yeah.
Kurt says EVH Con is a great hang. Going to miss it this year. I hear you. But it's going to be a good turnout. So yeah, if you have any questions for us or Simon and we missed it, please put it in the chat again. John asks, when's your next Melbourne gig?
With anyone or my next Melbourne gig with Daryl Braithwaite, who is a guy that's really, really well known in Australia. He's been around. He had a band in the 70s called Sherbet, which had a lot of number one hits. And then he had some number one hits in the 80s as well when he went solo as a singer. You know, you kind of maybe compare him to like a John Waite kind of guy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And his band Sherbet was more, you could say, more like the Babies. Anyway, so I've been touring a lot with him lately, just around the country, nothing international at this point. And we're actually doing a gig in Melbourne in exactly a week, next Monday, which is, we have the horse racing down here. We've got the what do you call it? The Spring Cup, you know, mm-hmm. And that's Cup Eve that we're playing. So it's the night before the big race. So that's the next Melbourne gig. But to be honest, I haven't been doing my people I'm working with haven't been doing that much Melbourne stuff. It's been mostly interstate. So it's been a lot of travel.
Keith Campbell's asking, going to release the Melbourne hotel video anytime soon?
That's a good question. The answer is yes. I've been touring so much with Daryl since COVID ended, but especially since we shot that gig in May. I had a couple of issues with a hard drive, so some of the files were corrupt. So that held me up initially. And thankfully, because for a while there, it was looking like some of the files were so corrupt that I wasn't going to be able to do the kind of job of it that I wanted,
Right.
which was a bit heartbreaking. But that got sorted after a lot of money and some hard drive techs. And so it's all systems go. I would say I'm about 2/3 of the way through the process of the video editing, and the mixes are pretty much done. So,
Nice.
So yeah, so that's going to be soon. But I've just been traveling too much.
That's a good excuse.
Yeah, apologies to everyone that's been waiting for. I've been waiting for it too. I'm really excited to get it up there because we had a lot of fun that night, and yeah, the good thing is that, you know, I know a lot of people have seen the Van Halen 1 album thing, but because this has so many different songs and from different eras, it's got the Sammy Hagar stuff as well. And I was so fortunate to have like a roster of really great special guest singers. So yeah, it's going to be fun, and I'm looking forward to getting that out there. But I would say like maybe 2 weeks, 3 at the most, and it'll be up and ready to go.
Nice. Stephen Douglas had asked, where did I see it? Just go scroll. He says, I may have missed it, but doesn't Simon use an attenuator and or IRs with his Fenders?
Oh, not for touring, no. Like I said, I tend to run the Fenders super clean so that any of the pedals, distortion pedals on my board, kind of it's really the sound mostly of the pedal rather than the combination of the gain pedal and the amp breaking up as well. I was saying earlier, I found that mainly with the solo, whatever pedal I'm using for my solo sound, if I've got the amp where I really want it for that edge of breakup clean, the solo pedal, I just can't get the volume out of it because obviously it's just hitting the front end of the amp and the amp's giving everything it's already got. So if I need more volume for this particular gig on stage, it gets to a point where it doesn't matter how much you turn up the volume of the pedal, it just saturates the amp more.
Right.
So that's the reason I tend not to need attenuators or anything for those gigs because the amp's so clean. But of course, for the Van Halen stuff, yes, 100% using the Boss tube amp expander. So I've been using that, and also I've got just recently actually the Fryette PLIR, the power power thing. I haven't tried using that for live yet, but man, in the studio, that thing is awesome. Yeah, really, really awesome. It used to be that I just had a real, what's the word? You know, like a real commitment to always miking up my amps because I'm lucky enough to live in a house big enough where I can have all my quad boxes and combos and stuff out in basically a double bricked room that used to be a wine cellar. I could mic everything up, but of course there's still a time of night where even with all the doors closed and everything, it's way too loud for the neighbors to be recording, you know?
Sure.
So I'd usually quit recording real guitars around dinner time or something just to be nice. But with the PLIR, I haven't needed to worry about that. It's been glorious. I can be still going in the studio recording guitar parts at 2 a.m. and using like a dimed plexi or whatever, you know, and it's been great. Yeah. But I haven't tried it for live. The only reason being is because what I could do, of course, is just not worry about an amp on stage at all and get the sound back through my monitor wedge, you know? The problem with that only works, I think, if you're doing a big tour with someone and you're taking the production and the monitor engineer with you so that every night is the same wedge and it's always dialed in the same. because that's not the case with the kind of touring I'm doing, and where we got different equipment and different monitor engineers all the time, I don't want my guitar sound to rely on how good my wedge sounds.
Right.
Because that means, if I get a wedge with a blown speaker and there's no spare, then the whole night my guitar sound is like crap for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's why. I mean, I've looked at lots of times finding ways of not needing an amp for touring, because it would just be easier. And now the technology is so good that there's plenty of ways of doing it. And if you're not going to do it, with a PLIR or something like that, you could obviously use a Kemper, or you could obviously use an Axe-Fx. There's so many ways of getting a good guitar sound. The problem is you're always still relying that your fallback is going to be in shape, and if it's not, you've got 90 minutes of pain. Yeah. So
that's true.
So that's why for me, if the artist doesn't have a problem with me with renting Fender combos for me, I always prefer that I have a guitar sound on stage.
Yeah. It's so much better to have control over your sound too. Like, so when you're at the complete mercy of the sound guy.
Oh man. And like I said, I've done really big tours. I did one with an Australian band years ago called Taxi Ride, and we were supporting Tina Turner on her last world tour.
Mm-hmm.
And we did 3 months around Europe with her. And also John Fogerty, which was great. And that was a situation where, because we were on her stage, we were using her production. It was the same every single night. In fact, of course, you don't even really need to sound check on those tours, because every single thing is the same as the night before. That's when you could go in-ears, or you could use, virtual amps and stuff like that. And it's really like less of a big deal. But when you're touring smaller scale and you just got at the mercy of whatever whatever monitor stuff is on stage, that's when it doesn't work at all. Yeah. I remember I did a whole tour, believe it or not. If everyone remembers the old kidney pod, the red kidney one, which by today's standards of amp simulation is pretty rudimentary. I did a whole minute work tour of South America with nothing but that. Wow. And the front of house guy loved me. He was this Scottish guy, and he's like, "Oh, Simon, that's fucking great. I can control your sound completely from the front of house." But for me, it sucked, because every single place we went, and because it was South America too, some of the sound equipment we got at various gigs was pretty rubbish.
Right.
And so there were some nights where, I mean, my guitar just sounded like a chainsaw, and it was horrendous, and it just means you can't enjoy the show,
Yeah.
But,
I always say, if you sound better to yourself, you're just going to play that much better.
Absolutely. The most important person I need to please on stage with a guitar sound is me. And it's not because of an ego thing. It's because if I like the way the guitar sounds, I'm going to play 30, 40% better at least.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, and it stops you overplaying as well, because I find that if my sound isn't good, I don't want to just sit on one note and let it ring, because it doesn't sound any good to me. So I'll tend to play more notes to disguise the fact that it doesn't sound that good.
Right.
So
that's true. And I remember it was earlier today, Pete Thorne was saying he toured Japan with the pod. So
yeah, that original kidney one, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, years ago.
There you go.
And he's he's playing in front of 70,000 people with the pod.
Yeah. What the hell? I remember when I was I guess I would have been like 16, 17. So when are we talking? Like about 1990. Do you remember those Zoom things that used to stick on your belt were like the big thing? And they were being
yeah.
Remember those things? Those black, they were about the size of an iPhone, I suppose, but a bit thicker.
Yeah, like an oversized wireless pack.
Yeah, like an oversized wireless pack. And you'd put it on your strap, and it was like a guitar amp / multi-effects all in one. Well, I remember seeing in a Guitar World magazine, I would have been 16 or 17, that Richie Sambora was using them now. Now, of course, I was an idiot and young, and I thought, wow, that's how he gets that Bon Jovi sound. He's just using that little thing. And obviously what it would have meant is we gave one to Richie Sambora, so technically he is using it in his kitchen or something. But
yeah, or backstage to warm up or something like that.
Right. A hotel room, exactly. So not a lie, but I just took it as meaning, oh, that's what he's using. Oh, that's awesome. So I bought one, and then my sound for probably not long, thankfully, but I'd say at least a year. I guess when I was about in my final year of high school, was that Zoom thing plugged into the front of a solid state Laney head and a 410 cab. It was glorious. I can tell you, glorious.
Hey, Holly.
Yeah, that was the sound.
Unbelievable says I had the Zoom clip on. It broke instantly.
Yeah. I actually have a funny feeling I've still got mine in a box in the garage somewhere.
There's something to do a video on, because that stuff people get a kick out of, right?
Oh yeah, and it's completely vintage now. I mean, we're talking about, well, it's over 20 years old, you know. Yeah.
That's right, Kurt. Rivers Cuomo did record a whole album with a pod.
Yeah. Well, didn't the Def Leppard guys record all of Hysteria with a Rockman or something?
It's all Rockman.
So
both channels, the clean and the dirty.
Yeah, the clean and the dirty. So I mean, it's doable, you know. But I mean,
also helps have Mutt Lang mixing it for you too, right?
Well, you got Mutt Lang, but you've also got racks and racks and racks of, you know, great compressors and Pultec EQs to kind of soften and round everything out, and then you got Eventide harmonizers, you know, chorusing everything. So yeah, I mean, if you've got all that, you could make it sound good. I mean, sometimes when someone books me to do a quick guitar session in my own studio, I mean, there's way better things than Amp Farm now, but that's what I started off using when I first got Pro Tools. And I just know how to use it so fast that I tend to still go to it, even though I think there are much better sounding things than that now. But I've learned some tricks along the way. Like I've got just a couple of nice pieces of outboard stuff that I'll run my guitar through and then run the finished Amp Farm sound through again. Like I've got a Tube Tech Valve EQ and Avalon 737, which I can kind of muck with it. And I just find that if you just give it a bit of love and a little bit of like ambient room reverb with like a simple plugin, you can. I've had people that I've recorded for ask me which amp did I use to record it. Like that just sounds pretty close, but you got to give it a bit of love, you know.
RJ in the chat here sent me what was it called? The Hot Watt, another clip-on device. I'm looking at. You have a push button for your choice of echo or chorus, a toggle of metal or overdrive, actually over D, or clean. And the power switch is a 3-position: off, on with low tone, or on with high tone. That's the 80s right there.
Sure is. Wow.
Yeah. Stereo or phone out. Okay. Yep. Hey. Yeah. And it probably ate through batteries in about half an hour.
You know, one video that me and my guitar tech Joe are going to do at some point, we've been meaning to do it for a while, we just haven't got around to it, is he's got the Boss, the tiniest Katana, you know, those little amps.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not sure even the wattage. I mean, it must be like 1 watt or something, but it's like the real, and he just uses it as the amp on his workbench to test guitars.
Yep.
But I plugged into it one day and it's got a brown sound button on it, which I'm sure we can all imagine what that's meant to be. So I tried that, and he'd just finished putting in one of my pickups in one of my Van Halen guitars, and it sounded great. And I thought, you know what would be a really funny video to do is have my like full Van Halen rig in the studio. So the dimed plexi and the Variac and all that stuff, and then do the exact same riff on the same guitar and record it with that, but record it properly, you know, give it a chance and actually see what the difference in $80 to $8,000 is. You know?
And especially because I think those even have a direct out too, right?
You could be right. I haven't looked, but yeah, you could
Wouldn't
be
doubt
right.
it. I'm pretty sure, yeah, they essentially are interfaces in many ways too, because they'll have like a
Yeah.
USB out or something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm sure they would. But man, that's what I was saying before. The technology is so good now. We're very lucky because it's an exciting time. I mean, and still, even though digital guitar technology is going in leaps and bounds, plugins for anyone that records at home are unbelievable. You got the world's best mix engineers now that even choosing to mix in the box these days. Like some of the biggest hits you'll hear on radio are mixed by guys that's doing it fully in the box. So the technology's really caught up, but it's also heartening to see that it doesn't seem to be slowing down great, tube guitar amps at all, and pedals and stuff. Like everyone's still buying them.
And we still have that group of people that are still recording like live off the floor and stuff. Maybe putting it to digital, but it's still a band in a room together with bleed over on everything to get that sound.
Yeah.
Hey, Nelson.
That's right. So I think that right now we've got the best of both worlds. I mean, back in the 80s, there was the tube stuff and that was about it, really. I mean, that's what most people were using. There's obviously some solid state amps, but there was no option, and then as the digital modeling thing, I mean, was the pod really one of like the first things? I know there's probably a couple other little things. I think the Zoom we were talking about is before the pod, but that was the first thing that people took seriously. Would that be right in your memory?
I would say so. Yeah, because I remember even when I got my Zoom multi-effects unit, which was a floor unit, but it's not that big. But I remember because I had all the presets, then it had them all again with cab simulation.
That's
and right. I was just like, what's that for? And then he's like, the guy, so he says, yeah, you can take this unit and plug it like directly into your computer and record guitar parts. I'm like, you can do that? I'm like, oh, you must need some fancy Macintosh or something for that. No.
Yeah. It's I mean that
was Sans amps, Boomer. What's up, Boomer?
Sans amp definitely, and then the kidney bean pod. I mean, they were probably the two things where I thought, oh, this is interesting. This stuff's starting to sound really good, But where we're at now with the Quad Cortex and Kempers, and I mean, and there's something else that's new that I came across. I can't remember its name right now, but it's like a Kemper Quad Cortex kind of thing. That's all right. It might come to me.
Yeah,
but that sounds really, really good.
It's tweakable
and tweakable. So, but I think that we should have all of it and use all of it. Like, I mean, for me, the most obvious use of, like, I've got a Kemper, but I don't take it on the road. I'd much prefer the sound. I'd actually much prefer risking the sound.
Okay, I'm just going to say you're the first person I've ever heard that said, I have a Kemper, but I don't take it on the road, because it's usually, I bought the Kemper to take on the road.
Yes. No, you're right. But I guess all I was going to say is...
You are from the future. I knew it.
I think all I was going to say, though, was like, I mean, I've only got like a handful of amps that are my go-to, some Fender combos, some Marshalls and stuff. But I mean, if I had a great collection of old amps, like old Voxes and Fender Bassmans and things like that I'd been using for years to record with, then yeah, I mean, I would capture all of them and take that on the road. So I wouldn't even use other people's profiles. It would be a way of taking my studio rig on the road. Yeah. So for that I would, but because that's not really the case with me, like I'm not.
Well, that's what I would say. Like Unbelievable says, he mentioned, Quad Cortex dumping all my LPD pedals. No, I'm not. Well, you have the guys that are going to be cloning their boutique stuff because of, fly-in. You can only carry so much cartage. So, well, I can't take my big pedal board with all my boutique stuff. So I'm going to model all this stuff that I can use on the road. So you still have your vintage or your boutique sounds, but in a virtual state.
Yeah. And sorry, Keith, I just saw you written Hoss there. Did I miss a question of yours or something, brother? let me know. Oh, and Ben Tom saying Kemper or Quad Cortex. I don't have the Quad Cortex, but I've watched a lot of the stuff online. The Kemper, for me, to be honest, has always been clunky to use. I've never really got natural with its interface. The Quad Cortex to me looks way, way, way easier to use, more intuitive, touch screen, all that stuff.
Right.
I just think that the layout and the what do you call it, the architecture of the Kemper is probably seemed intuitive at the back when it was first designed, but I just think that guitarists just want it to be simpler, you know. So, and I think from when people online have done the AB of the Kemper, made profiles with a Kemper and the same profile with the Quad Cortex, I think the Quad Cortex sounds a bit more like the real amp to me. I think the Kemper has this strange mid-range thing that it does, and some of the high gain sounds, the fizz in the gain doesn't sort of sound exactly right, you know. But again, I mean, it's what you do with its horses for courses. I mean, at the time when I did the Melbourne Guitar Show thing, that video on my channel, that's just the Kemper, and I've had a lot of people ask in the comments, is it the yes, it's the Kemper, but were you running it through a box and stuff on stage, and did you mic it up and record it that way? I was doing that for the on stage for the show, but actually there was a problem with the mic line. So all I could use for that YouTube video was just the direct outs of the Kemper. So that's, and you know, it sounds pretty good for what it is, and considering that there's just no real amp or speakers involved at all in the whole chain, and it sounds okay. So, but it's only when you compare it. I think if you're not A/Bing with something, it sounds great, you know. But
yeah,
I just think these other companies, the technology is moving so fast now that, I mean, sometimes when people are flipping from their capture to their real amp back and forward, it's very, very, very hard to hear any difference at all, really. I mean, and I actually would go to so far as to say most people probably wouldn't hear a difference.
See you, Bozique, and hey, Blackjack Guitar. Yeah, the late barbecue. Nothing wrong with that. Barbecue in the dark. Yeah, you would be, because it was dark by 7 o'clock, pretty much. Tom's talking about being loud. Sure.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know how much louder from the ceiling I can hear, but it's not the sound. Yeah.
John says, yeah, how is it supposed to sound good through my phone speaker if you're not using real amps and speakers? Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Wow, the guitar sounds like crap in that demo. What'd you watch on? My iPad?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I got to tell you a quick funny story about when I was working. I worked for about 5 years straight. I was one of the co-musical directors of X Factor here in Australia, and also Australia's Got Talent. And we used to make the show was filmed in Sydney, but we used to make all the music here in a big recording studio in Melbourne remotely. And then of course we would send it to them. And I remember this one time we were doing this R&B track, and it had this huge sub drop, like, you know, this once every 4 bars kind of thing, you know, it'd go boom. Anyway, they were really insistent that we get the sub drop right, because the contestant really, that was one of their favorite things in this track that they were singing. So we were like, all right, no worries. So we used to use 2 different synth players, and between the 2 of them, like, we always got the most amazing sounds, and just like the record that we were imitating. So we had this great big sub drop that used to shake the rooms of the studio on the wall speakers, you know. Anyway, we sent it to them. We'd worked for almost 48 hours straight, because every Thursday, Friday, we pretty much had to get it done in time for their Saturday rehearsals. And so we sent it to them. We'd only been in bed 2 hours, and they were ringing me and the other musical director and waking us up after 2 hours sleep, going, "Where's the sub drop? Where's the sub drop?" And we were like, "What are you talking about? The sub drop's there." And they're going, "No, it isn't." And they were getting really, really shitty with us. And of course, it only occurred to Dorian, the musical director, he just goes, hang on a minute, what are you listening to it on? And they're going, we're listening to it on the laptop and we can't hear the sub drop. And we were like, oh my God. So that is what you're dealing with these days. You know.
Dang suits. They think they know best.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. They really do. But
they write the checks. So what are you going to do? Excuse me.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Good to see my sister made it. Family time's over for the evening.
Anyone watch the Formula One a few hours ago in Texas?
I did not.
I know you're into your car racing, but you don't follow the Formula One at all, pretty much.
I just can't anymore. Yeah. I don't know what it was.
That's all right. Fair enough.
Yeah. I may, though. The way things are going. They're doing everything they can to screw up NASCAR. So.
Are they really?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But you realized 2/3 of the way into the season, you can't back the cars into the wall without the drivers getting concussions. They worry so much about, like front collision, but, on a big track, loop it around and back it in. There's next to no padding in the back of the seats. And
I never realized that. I thought they would have figured that out long before now.
Yeah. And the new cars don't crumple as much in the rear like they used to.
Yeah, right.
So, because it's more like driving GT cars now.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And you guys got Halloween just around the corner too, really.
Yes. Speaking of which, 1 week from tonight, we're doing our Halloween special, I guess. So every time there's a trick or treat, I'm going to do an edible, because why not? So
I think that's a wonderful idea.
I thought so. Yeah, we picked up 2 packs last week, folks. So for a total of 300 milligrams, just to see if we can go crazy in an evening. So
I've never been able to smoke it, but the only 2 times where I had any fun at all was when I ate it. So maybe I should look at some edibles.
Yeah, just moderate.
But moderate. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I've heard too many people like, I ate 5 milligrams and it didn't do anything, so I ate another 40. No. Yeah. No.
The first time I ever tried a particular thing, I should say it on, but it doesn't. I don't care. But something made of paper that you sometimes drop. I couldn't feel anything for the first couple of hours. So, of course, I had another one, and then it must have been a delayed reaction or something. That was a very interesting experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, that came up in our Patreon and members Zoom hang the other night.
Right.
Don't confuse microdosing and microdots, folks. Completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Michael Crosses, what musicians/bands from Australia should we know about? People who haven't broken out. I'm going to mention one band from Australia that I really dig. They have some following in Canada, but I don't think they've broken in the US for some reason. And they've been touring Canada for years. Is the Lazies. I love the Lazies.
Yeah. Cool. Great.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of great bands that I grew up with from, through the 70s and 80s and 90s. But I would say if you're talking about newer bands, which I'm guessing you are, no, is the short answer. I can't think of anyone right off the top of my head, but I'll keep letting it swirl around. Something might come to me. But no, there's no one Australian at this time that I'm sort of listening to.
Hit Metalworks asks, who are the members in Simon's ultimate Hosford band? He's played with some incredible musicians. So you got the budget, you got the tour, you get to put together your band.
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I suppose first it would depend what kind of music we would be doing in my ultimate band. But I would say... First, I'm trying to think of drummers because I'm I think like drums are always in my head. I kind of think like a drummer a lot of the time. So I think that'd be the most important thing for me.
Well, apparently Doug's late, but he's sufficiently drunk. That's fine, Doug. That's perfect. So you don't need to catch up. You're right in there. Perfect.
Let me get back to you on that one, Michael, and remind me later in the chat. I'm going to let that one swirl around a bit so I can give you some proper answers. Because right now I'm too busy formulating. But let me think.
All right, I'm going to throw one out as a kind of a professional sideman thing. What band, of course we don't wish any ill will on anyone, but if a band member happens to, twist an ankle or a wrist and can't play, who would you like to go out on tour with? Any band that's currently
I see what you're saying. Yeah, as like the hired guitarist.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Yeah. James Hetfield was skateboarding again and broke his arm again.
Well, I got to tell you, I think there'd be nothing much more fun than playing in the Foo Fighters. That's one thing.
Wow, we've asked that question twice now with two established musicians, and that's been the answer both times, is the Foos.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm just a massive, massive fan of Dave Grohl. I really think he kept rock kind of on life support through all the years since, what would you say, probably like since the grunge era, where rock music just wasn't the predominant thing on the radio anymore. I know that we all still listen to it, and I know that you could go and still buy the records or the albums or whatever.
But consistently new material for 30 plus years or 30 years at this point.
Yeah. I mean, the Foo Fighters began when really like rock on commercial radio, at least, like if we want to look at it that way, was kind of starting to wane. The music tastes were changing, and hip hop and R&B and EDM were all like becoming way more popular on FM radio. But yet you could always hear a Foo Fighters song. Whereas a lot of other rock bands that were still going, you wouldn't hear their stuff played on the radio, but you'd always hear Foo Fighters. And I just think, the way that he had a sense of humor about himself, and obviously all their music videos, I think helped a lot, because they weren't like a sort of a real muso-y serious band trying to be going, look at us, And
that's the interesting thing, giving Dave's background prior to the Foos, primarily known as a drummer, and he was playing like hardcore music and then grunge, but the Foos aren't that. The Foos are they're a rock and roll band.
They're a down and dirty rock and roll band. But look, the other thing, apart from that, I love that, to me, certainly in Australia, so I don't know how it was, other places in the world, but I mean, you turn on the radio and you would not hear much rock on commercial FM at all, but you would hear Foo Fighters. And I think he really kept rock alive for the mainstream. Us diehards, we're always going to find it somewhere, or we're going to just listen to the stuff we grew up with. But apart from that, he's a great songwriter. The songs were good and catchy. And apart from that, he always seemed like a pretty down to earth guy. The kind of guy
might have a couple of drinks before a show, which is nice, so it's not like at the point where we're a corporate entity, don't
exactly.
talk to Dave until you see him on stage, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know this for years, because I had that first Foo Fighters album and used to listen to it back then all the time. The other thing is the mixes and the production on that stuff was great. It was always tough, but it was never like harsh to listen to, so you could crank it. You could really crank it. But it still sounded tough, and it wasn't washed out or kind of sanitized in any way. But on that first record, he played everything. I never knew that for years. Yeah. So, I mean, that goes to your point, Ben, about, being a drummer. I guess it's not so much that this has come from a drummer. It's that as a drummer, no one knew he could do all those other things back then, But I love the sound of his voice. I think he's a great rock singer. He can scream and he can sing gently, and both are good. But yeah, he's a talented guy. So yeah, I think if I was going to like score the gig because of someone else's misfortune, tripping on a skateboard or something, yeah, man, I'd love
or
to
that's
play
easy answer, because Dave could add a fourth guitar player to the band. He doesn't care. He'll just add more people.
Well, he could, and to be honest, probably in the studio they are recording 4 guitar parts if you include overdubs. So
exactly.
So Dave, what are you doing? Come on, man. But look, I mean, there's someone else that comes to mind that's like not in that style at all, but like more like an R&B hip hop chick called Michelle Ndegeocello, who's great. And I mean, that would be a really fun gig to do. It wouldn't be as balls out as Foo Fighters. It would be more like funk stuff, R&B funk. But it would be, I love her music. That would be an awesome thing, you know. So there you go. So there's two different styles.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Who'd I see there? Scroll back. Johnny Hypebreaker asks, what is Haas's guilty pleasure band?
Do you mean like someone that I love listening to that probably other people would find kind of lame or daggy? Is that what that means?
I guess.
Johnny, can you? I'm watching the chat. Explain your question. Is that what you mean? The band you listen to, like
the band that, like, if you had said in high school to your mates, you know, hey, I'm checking out this latest album, they're like, really, dude, really? And you're like, yeah, I like them.
Yeah, like I think what maybe Johnny's going for example, is the kind of band that I wouldn't want to have to say now that I'm listening to, that kind of thing, right? I
used to have bands like that, but now I don't, because I just don't care anymore. You know, like, yeah, I listen to this.
Okay, I'll answer that. No problem.
I went into a Phil Collins deep dive again last week. All this 80s ballads.
See, this is a bit of a no-win question for me, because I know whatever I choose, who I choose to pin this on, there's going to be someone that's going to go, what are you talking about, man? That's not embarrassing. That's awesome.
Well, then you have camaraderie then.
So then I have camaraderie. Yeah, that's true. Okay. I think that that Ariana Grande's Dangerous Woman album is actually one of the best albums ever produced.
There we are.
Yeah. I think, and you know, it's what's his name? Guy in Sweden, I'm blanking on his name, but does it Max Martin. That's his brainchild. He produced and co-wrote most of the songs, and as we all know, Max Martin essentially is a rocker. You know, he's a rock guitarist that produces pop, and I just think that the flow of the album, the textures on the album, the mix, the production, the way Ariana sings is faultless as always. I think that's an album I've probably listened to since it came out.
Zach Long agrees. He says, yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah. I would have listened to that album more than 1,000 times since it got released. Easy. So, but that's not saying I don't go around going, ooh, Ariana Grande. But
I like Stephen Douglas. His first comment was like, please say Nickelback.
No, I never. It's funny, you know, I could never really find a reason to not like Nickelback, like on paper. Like I was like, okay, the songs are catchy. It's tough sounding. It's rock and roll, you know.
I found it was too country leaning for my I heard such a country element to it. Which is funny because country went that way much later in many ways. And, you know, Canada kind of got over Nickelback rather quick. But it's funny, traveling in the U.S., then I'll hear Nickelback. I'm like, why are you guys playing? We had to listen to it due to Canadian content laws. Like, you know, because we have to play 30% Canadian music on all radio.
Yeah, right. So, okay. Yeah,
okay.
They seem to be a band that everyone loves to hate. And in a way, I get it because I don't particularly like them either. I think, you know, the thing that put the nail in the coffin for Nickelback for me was when they released a single and it was either right on the back of a previous one or, you know, one before, but in pretty close proximity, that some dude on YouTube did a back-to-back and had one side of the screen playing one song and the other playing the other. And they were identical in tempo, key, middle 8 chords, everything. All they did was put new lyrics on top. And I thought that was just blatantly just trying to make more money from what you obviously had a hit single, so you just copied it exactly and changed some of the words and some of the melodies, but all the instrumentation and the length of the song was to the second. Everything was just, it was the exact framework of their previous single, and I just thought that was not a very cool thing to do.
Yeah, it was, and then Chad opened a studio and started discovering bands that started turning out more bands that just sounded like Nickelback, and we're like,
yeah,
no, just stop, just because there's like 3 or 4 of those bands floating around in the early 2000s. Like, no, now it's a freaking genre, now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, and that's why, you've got to give credit where credit's due. To me, I think this is anything in life, not just music, but people don't flock to something and spend their money buying a product en masse the way they do with a band like Nickelback or, many other bands.
That would be them, Kurt.
If there's not something in it, like, it's all right for musicians to sit back and go, oh, that's not very good, but they're obviously doing something right, because to me in life, there are no accidents. And there's a great expression I read in a book somewhere that's, how do you know that what's happening to you in life is meant to be happening?
Right.
Because it's happening. So there's no point looking at somebody's success, and in this case we're talking about Nickelback, but it could be somebody else, right? That you may not like that much, and say, I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, it's making sense to millions. So, so obviously meant to be happening. So, yeah, sometimes, yeah, I don't know. I'd hate to be A&R in a record company trying to predict which songs that are coming onto my desk are going to hit and which ones won't, because how do you know? How do you tell? I think you get.
Yeah, meanwhile, like Michael Cresus, I mean, all the Ramones songs sound the same and we all love them. Exactly.
Well, okay, that's true. That's a good point. And actually, I'd also say I absolutely adore and grew up with since I was 10 years old, early AC/DC. But come on, I mean, most of them are the same 3 chords.
Yeah.
Well,
the bookends of AC/DC, listen to the last 2 albums that came out and you're like, were these recorded in the same session? Because the mix is so the same.
Yeah,
like,
right.
I'm like, did you just bring up the previous Pro Tools session and continue on? Like, it's ridiculous how much. But I get, and especially at that point, if you're able to bring out new material at that age, good on you,
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. You can't love AC/DC and then bag Nickelback for sounding the same in the same sentence, because I'm sorry. And I love AC/DC, but so there you go.
All right. So with AC/DC, Bon or Brian?
Oh, that's tough. Actually, I couldn't live without some of that Bon stuff. Do you know that early stuff well, Ben?
Yeah. That's my wheelhouse.
I mean, I think one of my favorite albums of the early stuff would probably be Dirty Deeds, just because it's got some of my favorite songs on it. Like, that really, really slow one, Ride On.
Yep.
It's like, it's gonna ride on, ride on.
And it's recorded. All that stuff is recorded so basic because it's just their cousins recording them, like probably live off the floor, and then vocals after.
100%. But that song and the way Bon sings it is just so beautiful to me. It just sounds like.
I loved his lyrics in so many songs. Like
his lyric,
he was about playing in bands and and stuff like that. And I'm like, yes.
Bon was a great lyricist. But then, you're on the Brian Johnson. Okay, so I don't really love most of the newer, more corporate-y kind of AC/DC Brian Johnson stuff. But man, Back in Black and For Those About to Rock, killer. I mean, that was a case where, to me, you had a new singer coming in that obviously could polarize people in the same way the Sammy Hagar, David Lee Roth thing did, but it really didn't. I don't think. I think people accepted Brian because that album was so awesome that how do you argue with it? It's like,
it was a super strong album, that's for sure. And and I think
Big
Mutt Lange definitely had to have help with that because like those 2 albums, For Those About to Rock and Back in Black, which were the last 2 of the 3 that Mutt did, but then it just went. Like flick of the switch.
Yeah.
Fly on the Wall. Bad.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree. I actually, I didn't really stop listening to the newer stuff, but I stopped buying it. That's the difference. Right. Whereas I bought Back in Black and I bought For Those About to Rock, and right. I just think both those albums are really, really strong. They got some killer tracks,
It's weird. I started the journey with both singers at the same time, essentially, because I had borrowed the Who Made Who album off somebody, which is essentially Greatest Hits. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is cool. And then I went down to the store and I bought Back in Black and High Voltage together. So,
right.
And it was just like, wow, okay. I'm like, the early stuff's really stripped down. And I remember my dad listening to it and he's just like, wow, they're a pretty good bar band, but they're just a bar band. It's like,
he's not wrong though. Yeah, that's right. But he's not wrong though. That early stuff to me almost sounds like you can almost picture and smell.
There's a lot more rockabilly to it. And, you can hear the 60s influence way more.
100%. And I mean, that early stuff to me, they were basically just a slightly supercharged blues band. Just a great blues band.
A lot of swing, a lot of boogies stuff.
A lot of boogies, rockabilly, like you said. Absolutely. And obviously it got more into their kind of pounding four on the floor corporate kind of rock after the two Brian Johnson albums we're talking about. But so there wasn't even really much of that stuff, that thunderstrucky kind of stuff, stiff upper lip and all of that. There wasn't even much of that on Back in Black. All the songs had a different feel. So to me, I don't know whether they'd already pre-written some of those grooves before they got Brian in, but one of the things I used to like about their records, their older stuff, is that it just didn't have that kind of, 100 beats a minute, four on the floor, AC/DC, which really in the modern era, that's how I think of it. I know that's
bass
probably
player was still actually playing bass runs and not just riding the root in every song.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That whole picking, just riding the root, that 100 beats a minute,
which is great, because Cliff turned that into a career. And
it is great, and I love it too. But there's something about, I mean, think of songs like the song For Those About to Rock. I mean, that's another one where it takes some. You got to be brave to record a song with that much space and that slow. That's so slow, that song. You don't realize until you listen to it with, after a while. If you haven't heard it for a bit and you listen to it and you go, oh my God, if I was in the studio, I'd be nervous to record a song that slow because every little thing is exposed. Yeah. There's some great stuff on those. But there's another good old Bond song that I love when I'm in a really, really good mood, whether I'm in the car or whether I'm cleaning the house or whatever I'm doing. I just put the ears in and crank it, and There's Gonna Be Some Rockin', which is basically just a blues shuffle. Yeah. But I don't know, Bond sounds happy. They're funny. They're fun lyrics, and he sounds happy, and the band are just smoking in that.
Yeah. I agree. Down Payment Blues, another great one.
Down Payment Blues.
For me, it's Riff Raff. To come out, to see them live in that day, and they would come out, and that's their opening song is Riff Raff. You got the crowds right there the rest of the night.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Down Payment Blues, Booms to Black. That's another great one. Love that. I mean, man, so many bands molded their sound on AC/DC. It's just crazy, you know. They're kind of like the Beatles of early rock, really, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But yeah. So if anyone someone was asking before any Australian bands I'd recommend, there you go, AC/DC.
Yeah. In case you haven't heard of them.
Yeah, in case you haven't heard of them, that's exactly right. Yeah. That's funny. And there's a song just the other day, I was listening to Def Leppard's Armageddon It, and it's almost exactly an AC/DC song that Mutt worked on, which is interesting. And I'm trying to think which one it was. I think it's it's one of the early Brian Johnson ones, but it's escaping me. Doesn't matter. Someone will know.
Yeah, another great one, Symmetry. Ain't no fun waiting around to be a millionaire. Yeah.
Killer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great song. Great song. I used to love that one. I haven't listened to that one in ages. Yeah, that's
some great lines in there.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a real cheeky kind of fun lyricist, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And always with clever puns and things like that. Yeah. He always had a great way of wording something so that it could have two meanings.
Pushing the limits, so you got all those 70s
Yeah.
housewives going, oh, I don't know about that lyric, but clutching pearls and stuff. So,
yeah. 100%. Michael Krause is saying maybe the Living End are a great band. Chris Cheney is a really wonderful guitar player. If anyone is looking, they're kind of like, I'd call it rockabilly, like supercharged. Mm-hmm. They're like a trio with a double bass, and he's got like a great big Gretsch, but it's like full like punk rock rockabilly, So if anyone is curious to check them out, they're great.
Nice.
Another Australian band.
My sister is dating herself because her favorite AC/DC song is Money Talks.
Money Talks. I can't even.
That was a good
think
song.
off the top of my head how that one goes. Actually.
Yeah, that would have been on. That was on the same album that Thunderstruck was on. I remember because those were the two. I was like, wow, the band's back. Like they're back. The Razor's Edge. That was a good album.
Yeah. Hang on. I'm grabbing my phone. Excuse me for a second. I've got to find out what that what I think is like what Def Leppard kind of based on. Because it's real close.
I get it. I get it.
There's
been shows where I can't think of one thing and then I'll think of it the next show. I'll just randomly blurt out something. So you got to be a regular viewer to understand some of my thought processes. I'm just saying.
It's Let's Get It Up for those about to rock.
Another great track. Always like
that's
that
a
one.
Great track. Yeah, but if you listen to
the deceptively easy sounding riff, but really you got to attack it right to really nail that.
Yeah, it's cool. I like that one too. Great feel. Oh man, they were just so comfortable laying back on the beat at a time where everyone was doing faster stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it kind of got back into that Bond kind of swingy groove to it. It had that groove.
I agree. Yeah, Let's Get It Up could totally be a Bond style song if he was singing it, Yeah, almost that kind of slinky, sleazy sort of stuff that, they used to do, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Keith H. What's Next to the Moon? What's Next to the Moon probably has the best bass playing you'll hear in an AC/DC song.
Yeah.
Guitar Man 45 used to cover Sin City. Nice. I used to cover TNT. I did the Ois and started the guitar part. And that is almost impossible to do. The Ois are so off compared to the guitar beat. You're like, they didn't record this together. They did not record that together. It's like I would have to be doing it. I'm like, okay, and bring up the volume pedal.
Yeah.
Terry says Angus stated publicly they have tons of stuff backlog waiting to be used.
Really? That's interesting.
Nice. Well, that's a nice thing about an AC/DC song is if you can find just a riff in a track somewhere and build on it.
Yeah.
They play it live just fine. Yeah. Girls Got Rhythm. So we're getting all the hits out. Did we mention If You Want Blood? Yeah. Possibly my favorite live album is the If You Want Blood live album.
That's great. Yeah, for sure.
It's just a killer set. And you can tell it's live. Like they didn't overdub a ton of it or anything like that.
That's right.
It's a pretty honest representation.
Yeah, I mean, look, anyone that's seen AC/DC live know that there's no issues with them cutting, even at the age they're at now, cutting that stuff live. So you can just tell they're not a band that would do that. I'm sure if the overall concert was great and there was just like one or two moments that they didn't really like, they might just give them a quick little fix up. But that it's not going to be a live video of overdubs. So and
exactly.
Yeah, Let There Be Rock, great song, great solo in that song, really great. Yep. I've always fantasized about not necessarily doing an AC/DC tribute show to tour or anything, but I would love to do a gig where I just got to play all those songs properly and authentically, even just once. It'd be such a. I mean, I really grew up listening to a lot of that stuff when I was about 10, 11, 12, that was like mostly what I was listening to.
That's something I've been meaning to doing. I mean, sure, there's got to be some videos on it on here on YouTube. Some deep dives on like Angus's playing, because I've never heard someone so fluidly mix between major and minor scale.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You know,
He's the
and I just listen to it and I'm like, it's a throwback, because he's very much like Brian Setzer in it, like his rockabilly lead playing. Like he's playing scales that you haven't heard since Chuck Berry and all those guys, and just the way they play it, and it's just, you can tell because they came from a different era. And then they bring it into by the 70s, but it's like the only other time I kind of heard it was a little bit with some of Mick Mars's playing. Mick Mars will throw some of that rockabilly stuff in the middle of a Motley Crue song. You go, I know what you did there. I know what you did there. Most of the people that are wearing leather jackets don't know, but we know.
We know. Yeah. No, I didn't realize how much I loved Angus's playing until actually much later in life, because very quickly I kind of, when I was young and, started playing in cover bands when I was like 13, and that was about the time when I first heard Eddie Van Halen. And then of course I just wanted to work on all that stuff, and Yngwie Malmsteen I heard around then as well. And it felt like technically wise, Angus was like a stepping stone to all this other stuff that became huge in the mid to late 80s, but it's weird. Like, I mean, I can even be doing a guitar session for someone, recording a solo on whatever kind of music it is, and I'll play a lick and I'll just look down and go, oh, that's exactly like an Angus lick. So obviously, even though I didn't sit around as a kid like learning all of them on guitar, but they just went into the subconscious, because I used to listen to those records over and over and over, and I didn't realize what an influence is. Like, I can hear, now that I'm aware of it, I can hear Angus in my phrasing all the time, more than the 80s shredders that people might think would be a part of my playing. It's actually, I was never really that much of a shredder.
And then he does it with his head all bobbing around, and he's all running around like a maniac. I was like watching some of the old, like somebody put up not too long ago, it's from like 77, 78, like a show in London. Nice, like pro shot. And I'm just like, the energy level. It's like watching ZZ Top videos from the late 70s, early 80s. Totally different band in many ways. Just like
totally different. Yeah, I agree.
Crap. The energy is through the roof.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go for a few more minutes here, folks. Get any last minute questions, comments in, and we'll get on them.
Sure thing.
Yeah. No such thing as too much Bon. I agree, Keith.
I agree too.
And if you want some real fun, check out some early Bon when he was with Fraternity.
Oh, Fraternity. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I have them doing a cover of a band song. Oh, come to me. It's not The Wait. Was it? No, it wasn't The Wait. Oh, it's terrible. It'll come to me. But it's great, because also I'm like, it's weird. I'm listening to the band, but I hear Bon Scott.
Yeah.
And it was like a TV appearance or something I found online. I just scammed the audio off of it, because I was like, that's cool. All right, so Charles says, Haas has 30 minutes to himself. What does he pick up, and what does he play on it just for himself?
Okay, that's a good question. That will change completely depending on my mood. So if I've got 30 minutes to myself and I don't have to prepare anything for a gig, I might pick up one of my acoustics and maybe open tune it to some wacky tuning. That's something that I learned years ago that I used to have fun doing. And you can't play all your regular shaped chords. So all of a sudden you've got to just come up with a little riff for an idea, or it might turn into a song, doesn't matter. But I'll just start noodling and see what happens, and see if anything it's like accidental songwriting, because you're using your ear to guide where you want to hear it go, but you can't rely on your fingers being put down in the right place, because they'll hit some weird notes. And sometimes those weird notes just really spark a creation, you know, go, oh, that's cool. And of course you never would have done that. So sometimes I'll do that. Sometimes if I've got only 30 minutes, I'll just pick up one of my guitars. Like one of the things I've been working on lately is, it's a bit of a secret I can't give away, but I'll give it away anyway, is there's a possibility next year I might be doing a note for note Malmsteen record in track order. So, which is going to be really, really tricky for me because I don't play intuitively like him at all. My right hand doesn't really like all that directional picking. The Eddie stuff comes more naturally to me, but for some reason. But anyway, so that's a challenge that I'm setting myself. So if I get 30 minutes, I'll just pick up one of my Strats and not plug in and just do 30 minutes of the exact same lick and see how much quicker I can get it. And that, believe it or not, that's actually fun for me. That might sound super boring with my 30 minutes, but that's okay. I like doing that stuff.
You play the same lick though for 30 minutes. You're going to have that lick like pretty much down usually.
Yeah. And I find it doesn't have to be Malmsteen, could be any guitarist where I really can't play it at first. Like it's very unintuitive to me. It's going to take like 30 minutes every day of doing nothing but that one lick. Because what you got to do, of course, is train your muscles to almost make it subconscious in your muscles so that they don't have to think about whether it feels tight or this. And because of course everybody's hands are different. So what might be easy for Malmsteen, I don't have his hands, so it might be tricky for me, which mostly is, yes, it is. But so I might do something like that. What else? Now
the question is, I guess you have to kind of go for that shrill Strat into a plexi tone as well.
Well,
I cringe thinking about it.
Well, when I got my plexi style amp to run dimed for the Van Halen thing, I remember I was reading an interview with Yngwie somewhere, like an old one, you know, from the 80s, which is to me when he had his best sound. My favorite tone of his is from around the Trilogy album, like 1985. I thought it was a really great rock Strat sound. And I remember reading an interview and he said, all I use is a plexi with pretty much all the controls on half, including the volume. And then he'd run a DOD overdrive preamp, one of those yellow cast iron pedals in the front. Yep. And I read that and I remember thinking, hang on a minute, I think I've got one of those old DODs in one of my boxes in the garage. And so I had the plexi and I set the controls how he said it, and I got my DOD. Now, this is such an old pedal, and it's the noisiest thing in hell in front of a plexi that's already breaking up. Sure. And I plugged my Strat in with the high output single coils, and I was like, that's it. That's exactly the mid-80s Malmsteen sound. So that day I spent my half an hour just mucking around with that. That was no fun. Yeah. So that's about it. Or, you know, I might if I'm in the middle of writing a song that I haven't finished, like, and it's still sort of kicking around in my brain, I might pick up a guitar and spend 30 minutes trying to finish that, you know, something creative. So for me, it'll either be 30 minutes doing something kind of mindless, like just practicing one lick over and over, like a trance, or it'll be doing something creative. But that's about it.
Hey, that works for me. Well, there we are. I think this has been a great show tonight. We deep dived on your signal chain, which is awesome. We spent a lot of time on AC/DC, which I like. Because, again, you know, growing up, it was very much Van Halen, AC/DC, and I appreciated Van Halen, but I went with AC/DC and went, you know what? That's a wheelhouse. I could probably do that.
Yeah, for sure. Keith, sorry, go on, Ben.
Yeah, it's just, and I went to school learning, you know, the worship at Malcolm Young's feet.
Yeah, I mean,
you know, for me, it wasn't about it. I loved Angus's playing, and I still do. But for me, it was from day one. I went, listen to that. He is so solid. So,
that's what it is. And you know, I'll get even recently, like guitar students come to me, and of course they come to me because they see me doing something flashy, maybe, and they want to learn that stuff. But more often than not, I find that when I start getting down and dirty with them, going, cool, let's just jam on this AC/DC groove, they can't play Malcolm. And to me, that should be the foundation of any rock guitarist or blues guitarist. If you've got to be able to play Malcolm, if you can't make that feel good, there's no point with all the other stuff, you know.
I used to say, the solo is only at most, 20 seconds of a 4-minute song. So
that's really the truth of it. It's like an interlude. That's all it is. It's the smallest part of the song, and you got to make the rest of the song feel good, for sure. But that's why Angus and Malcolm for me, when people ask me who my influences are, I think they expect me, because I've done some Van Halen and this and that. They expect me to say, oh, Van Halen or Steve Vai or Paul Gilbert, but actually, really, it's Angus and Malcolm first. And then those other guys were kind of after that. And that was the order that I listened to it when I was a kid too.
Sure.
Yeah.
I get that. Oh, excuse me. Well, on that note, he's been Simon, a.k.a. Hoss, a.k.a. The Legend. I've been Ben, until further notice. Tomorrow night, we'll be back with Canucks with Guitars live Q&A session with myself, Terry, and Trev. And then coming up this week, a Soda Pop video that I don't know what it is because I haven't checked yet. And then maybe we finish the Kramer this week, Charles. Maybe we finish the Kramer this week. Maybe.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you for having me on, brother. It's been a pleasure as always. And I'm very humbled. And of course, thanks for everyone in the chat. I'm sorry if I missed any questions. If there's something about equipment or anything else like that someone really wants to know and I missed it, feel free to DM me on Insta or Facebook or something. I'll be happy to chat about anything that you're curious about.
Yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
So, as always, folks, hold those doors open. Let Doug's wife in ahead of you in traffic because she's real. She's real. And be good to each other. Happy tone chasing. Look for there's some deals out there, folks. Just saying. And new products coming out all the time. Because that's how that works. And I'm looking for the end video. There's the end video. So, yeah, be good to each other. And don't litter.
Thanks, everybody.